I just want to talk tonight or today about Slobodan Milosevic, who was the president of Yugoslavia. I missed the Yugoslav wars because I was in Saudi Arabia. But when I got back to England, I was really astonished one morning to turn the radio on and find that the RAF was bombing Belgrade as part of an attempt to wrest Kosovo from the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, in which they were successful. Now, this was a war, one of Tony Blair's first wars. The result was, though, that although Kosovo was taken away from the Yugoslavs were not actually defeated. What happened several years later, the CIA did a putsch in Belgrade, similar to the one they tried or attempted and succeeded in Ukraine. Because they couldn't get rid of Slobodan Milosevic by direct military assault with 78 days of bombing, they then did a putsch. And Milosevic was displaced as president of Yugoslavia, and he was sent into prison at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, which was staffed by American or US people who they approved of. Now, after a little while, Milosevic died. Now, my assertion on this program is that that was a deliberate murder by the American and British authorities of Milosevic because it was a thorn in their side. And if you look at the reports of the medical conditions when he actually died, all that indicates that my assessment is correct, because it was improving and then suddenly, bang, bang, he's dead. This is another example of international justice. International justice is anything the Americans don't approve of. Furthermore, there are other people like Hess, who was murdered at Spandau in Berlin, who was a war criminal. But he was given a 25-year sentence or something, and he should have been allowed to live out his natural life. Instead, he was bumped off by the Allies. Now, what I want to say is that apart from the fact this circumstantial evidence indicates Milosevic was murdered, there is also a lot of reality checks about the people who were in charge in the West. Tony Blair in particular. He was a criminal and is a criminal. Mr. Baker, who was one of his cabinet ministers, wrote a book something about the strange death of Dr. Kelly, and it proves quite conclusively that Dr. Kelly was murdered on the instructions of Tony Blair, or with his complicity. So that's all very sad. Now, we've had other people murdered since. We can think of the murder of Gaddafi in Libya. We can think of the kangaroo court in Baghdad of the president of Iraq after the invasion of Iraq. Now, these people like Tony Blair are absolutely incorrigible idiots and criminals. I stood, as many of you have done, in front of the TV studio in Belgrade, where Tony Blair launched a missile into that studio to kill all the makeup artists in the studio, which he did. There were 8 of them, I think. And he described them as war criminals, to the foul House of Commons, who cheered just like the groundhogs or the warthogs or whatever you call them, the groundlings of the Nazi Party in the 1933 when they cheered Hitler. That's our House of Commons, completely discredited by the war criminals who staff it, including Mrs. May, all of whom are responsible for the murder of Milosevic.